Welcome to the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We are into almost week 6 of the college football season here, which, if my math is right, that makes this also the 6th episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour, maybe 7th. We might have done one in the preseason. I don't remember. It's all going by so fast. I'm Patrick Murphy from Bucknuts and 247 Sports, hosting today. We're going to talk Buckeyes, Michigan State. We're going to have some fun with the happy hour as we have the last few weeks. I've got a Bud Light, nothing special today. My St. Louis Cardinals are currently playing, so that's my St. Louis pride right there. But if you can pull up and grab a cold one, feel free. We're going to be joined by Stephen Brooks here in just a minute from our Michigan State site. Talk some Michigan State with him for about 20 minutes or so. Get a lowdown on what's going on with the Spartans before the Buckeyes head up to East Lansing. Then we'll talk some Buckeyes. I've got some topics planned, but if you guys have anything you want to talk about, feel free to throw some questions, some ideas in the chat. If you have questions for Stephen, feel free to put them in there as well if you have questions about Michigan State and what's going on there. So without further ado, let's get Stephen in here and let's get this happy hour going, shall we? There he is, Stephen. How you doing?
Man? I'm doing great, man. You're a man after my own heart with the Bud Light. That's what I would be drinking on, but I ran out a couple days ago, so I'm on my fall routine with ruby red grapefruit juice. Knocks the flu, any of that fall sickness, stuffy stuff right away, right out of you. It's 1A to booze, honestly. So if I don't feel anything yet, so this is kind of the preventative. But if I start feeling that little tickle, honestly, I don't know if it's I don't know what the science, if it would back me up on this, but a good booze, a good boozing, a good night of indulgence, usually for me, for whatever reason, I don't know if it kills it, on spot or what, but that's usually a good deal as well.
All right. Well, that's good to know. That's a nice endorsement for them.
That's my medicine. That's my medicinal tip for the show right off the top for everybody.
I love it. Maybe they should give you an NIL deal for that. So let's talk Michigan State. You and I did our question exchange that people can go on the sites, both of our sites, and read if they want to. So we'll probably cover a little bit of some of the stuff that was in there. But I guess the most obvious thing, and we did touch on this in the questions, but this Michigan State team was among the top in the country last year. That has not been the case so far this season. Without going into too much detail, but for people who on our side who haven't seen Michigan State each week, what's going on in East Lansing right now?
Yeah, I'll try to be as concise as possible, but I mean, there's a lot. It's layered. Look, I think there was a lot of assumptions made, after last year and all the success that they had. And of course, when you look back on it, and even in the moment, though, a lot of people knew so much was built around Kenneth Walker and everything he provided that offense, and in turn provided that defense by allowing them to stay on the field and you can get them early leads. I mean, I'm not going to say he was the whole team. He was the only thing, the only reason they won all those games. Of course not. But, he had a hand in almost everything that went right for him. And I say all that to say, so I think there were some natural assumptions made about, certain players taking steps forward and just especially defensively, they gave up more passing yards per game than anybody last year. So it was kind of like, well, they can't do that again, right? And now it kind of looks almost the exact same, and it is almost the exact same personnel back there. Other than they got a transfer from Georgia, Amir Speed, number 6, who's a 6'3" corner, and looks pretty intimidating, but really hasn't done much to raise that unit in the past game. So it really comes down to two major things, as I wrote in my Q&A with you. I mean, there were even if you bought all the hype in the world and thought this team was going to run it back with 10 more wins again or something, 10 plus or whatever. Everybody always had two main concerns coming into camp, and they were obvious as day. It was offensive line play and defensive backfield, play. And through 5 games now, there's not many good answers, on either front. That's kind of when what's holding them back on in each of these 3 losses. There's been some consistencies in those areas. They start 2-0 against Western Michigan and Akron, and with all due respect to them, there's a difference when you play Power 5 competition, as we've seen, and their run game has just dropped off a cliff, and the secondary really wasn't even up on the cliff to begin with. I mean, they've been kind of down the whole year, so that's been troubling. When you see the same thing, it's stuff that even like Joe Fan can see, like the guy who doesn't know, knows nothing about football, just tunes in on Saturdays, And it's like, wait a second, why are they catching the ball and there's nobody on Michigan State's defense on my screen right now. Like everybody can see that type of stuff.
That's
right?
a problem.
Yeah, or when you run inside zone and you guys getting stonewalled right at the line of scrimmage, or it's 0, 1, 2 yards at best repeatedly. And everybody can see that, like, why are you running up the middle? It's like, well, there's nuance there, and there's other, you got to keep balance and this and that. But there's some of these things too that like everybody can see, and I think that's added to that sense of frustration. It's not like super high level 4D chess that's breaking down,
right.
that you could say, the third down pressure packages are, they're not attacking the weak side as much. We're not at that level yet. It's like, it's just at some elementary levels where things are really broken down. And like I said, everybody can see it. And I think that's added to the frustration.
You mentioned in our Q&A that fans, for a number of reasons, are being patient with Mel Tucker. But one of the things I thought that I just hadn't looked into was the recruiting, and that's picked up really. So is there, maybe this season doesn't go the way fans want it, but is there a light at the end of the tunnel coming down the road in your perspective with this team? And I know we'll talk about this game and whatnot, but just kind of big picture here. Do you see it progressing in the right way?
Oh, of course. Right now, and as we sit here in early October, I mean, sure. If the idea is, even, and I think there are a lot of reasonable people thought that this could be a underachieving team, but what we thought that looked like more like 6-6, right? Now that's like, man, can they get to 6-6? So things have shifted kind of radically. You just don't want to see that total death spiral swirling the toilet bowl, right? You want to at least, punch back a couple times. Right, nobody expects them to win tomorrow, but rise up and beat Wisconsin the next week. Don't get completely obliterated by Michigan, and then regroup in November and pick up a couple things. You got Illinois in there, Rutgers, Indiana, all winnable games. I know Illinois looks obviously better than they have lately, but winnable games. And then you go finish at Penn State. So, I say all that to say, like, if they do death spiral and start losing some of these commitments, in the 2023 class, and things can move quickly now in the NIL era, as they've learned. They've been right there in the thick of some races, and then at the 11th hour, it's something different. So that could certainly happen. And if the performance starts sputtering again, then you could see that happening. Right now they're holding firm, and so that's the reason. Like you mentioned, like that, and I was writing about, like, there is a lot of faith here, and people want to make every loss $95 million, and the contract gets brought up, and it's punchlines, and everyone's having a good time. But he was never being paid for that season. It was always about where he could take it, and it's like nobody would have ever predicted that they were going to go 11-2, win the Peach Bowl last year. Even they knew Kenneth Walker was really good, but they didn't know they were going to go win all those games. And I think it's 4-0 in one possession games, a couple of at least one overtime win, quite a few fourth quarter rallies. Like, a lot broke their way. And I'm not saying like necessarily they were lucky, but a lot broke their way, and in college football that swings back on you eventually, right? So the recruiting is, that's a big part of why he got paid, of why the faith is still there. Right now, I think it's 10 4-star commitments. I think that would have been the most or second most at worst of the whole Mark D'Antonio era, and obviously he built that program and sort of on, overachieving guys, diamonds in the rough. Right. And that was mostly true. I mean, they did have some legit talent come in there. It's not like it was just a bunch of bums off the street that they developed. I mean, they did get some good players, but there was always a good story, like every cycle, of somebody who was overlooked who became a stud here. So all that, but they're reaching higher now. This staff, they're going coast to coast, every corner of the country. They have some connections, or they're at least going to get into fights there, which is different from the previous staff. They don't feel like, they're not intimidated by that, whether that's sort of false bravado at this point, or whether it's the smartest use of resources, we'll have to see. But they have won pretty big in Texas and in Louisiana and Florida so far, sort of in their weight class, I guess you'd say. And they're trying to sort of throw their weight around against the Georgias and the Ohio States and all that of the world. But they got to build up to that. So the 23 class right now, again, a long-winded answer, but if it all sticks together, which I think it probably will for the most part, unless things go totally off kilter, totally, then that would be, I think, again, the best or second best class of the last, 20 years, 15, 20 years. The 2024 class is already off to a start with 2 guys who are 4 stars, top 200 guys. So there's no evidence at this point that on the recruiting trail, Mel Tucker isn't what everybody thought he'd be, basically. I guess I probably could have just answered it in just that sentence. But yeah, there's all the evidence is there that he will be he's building towards something that'll be much, much more competitive, much more capable of giving Ohio State, a bloody nose at least.
Well, and I think that's a good thing for the conference, and I know some people disagree, but when Ohio State, some years where it's just been run through the Big Ten, you get to the college football playoff, and you saw it. I mean, they had that close game against Clemson in 2019, but if they'd played some closer games and the competition had been tougher that year, maybe they're more used to playing in some of those games. I think it's better when there's competition, especially in this division. When Penn State was challenging, when Michigan State under D'Antonio was challenging Ohio State. And plus, for the viewer, wouldn't you rather have some fun games? I mean, frankly, I'm sick of covering blowouts. I'd like to see an interesting game at some point this year.
No, yeah. I mean, just different representation in Indianapolis. Like, with all due respect, I'm sorry to your viewers and everything. Like, I get it. But it's just like, man, like that year that Penn State went, like, was kind of fun, honestly. And like, it was kind of cool to see somebody different down there. Like, I've seen Michigan State, they'll get down there. I mean, Northwestern obviously has played a couple, a couple good quarters, I guess we'll say, down there, across a couple games. So, just even getting some different matchups down there, would be fun. I guess that does mean, bad things in Columbus for that they're not there. But I can't lie. I mean, that would be kind of cool to see a little bit more of that. Or just, the way Penn State used to roll into Columbus and they had that night game, and you actually felt like there was something, maybe could happen there. Wisconsin used to come in. And obviously Michigan's been what it has been for, the better part of 20 years. But no doubt. I think it's, especially, how interesting things could be if we go divisionless here in a couple years or whatever with the West Coast guys coming in. I don't know what that would look like, but, with scheduling and all that necessarily. But, I mean, I want to say it would lift all boats with a good Michigan State. And, that's the thing. I mean, I think people laugh at it a little bit, and it's like, oh, yeah, they're going to go they're going to go recruit toe-to-toe with Ohio State. It's like, well, dang if they're not trying, man. Like, they don't believe that they, of course they're going to take some on the chin right now. They're not going to win hardly any of those, if any of those right now. But it's like, you got to keep knocking on that door. Or else why bother? You're not even in the race, and so they're swinging against some big time programs in some of these races, and making headway. I think so. There's a lot to be happy about. I want to say optimistic about with the recruiting end. It's just like there's this other dynamic in play, and I don't know if your viewers really understand the complexity of this, but like if we just when Mel Tucker was hired and like when you can realistically expect anything out of him. He was hired in February of 2020, not like December or like Thanksgiving of 2019, where you had 2-3 plus months, to salvage a class, to get in there with the weight room and see those guys, to put together spring ball or maybe even have a couple of those. Like, he got hired, and 1 month later, campus was shut down, literally almost exactly 1 month later. So his first recruiting class, 2021, I think he had 1 week to host those kids. And everything else was done by Zoom. And look, I know everybody had these restrictions. I get it, but who else had 1 week, to meet these guys as a first year head coach at a major program like that? So it's like that whole 2021 class, even, which was pretty solid, like all things considered. But it's a decent chunk of it's already washed out. Some guys never made it to campus. A lot of guys have kind of been recruited over or passed over already. So people are willing to throw that one out already and say 2022, this year's freshmen. Year 3 for Mel Tucker football-wise, but this year's true freshman class, this is his first real class, they say. So now 4 years from now, which would be going into year 6? Year 6 for Mel Tucker is when they're juniors, I guess, at that point. Year 6 of your first recruiting class. It's like, was that fair then to judge him? So there's some weird dynamics in play. I don't mean that to say like there's dissent or anything. Like I said, I think his approval rating is very, very high. People are still extremely pleased with what he's doing for the most part. They kind of want to see a new defensive coordinator after everything that's gone on. But in terms of Mel Tucker, I mean, his popularity and approval rating is still through the roof. Like everything I just mentioned kind of is why.
Well, let's get into this game. And if you have questions about Michigan State, throw them in the chat for Steven. He'll know better than I will about the Spartans. And we do have a couple here. Where goes Ohio, or where goes one? Sorry, read that wrong. From YouTube, who is the biggest pass rusher in East Lansing? Who's the guy the Buckeyes need to be worried about when it comes to getting to C.J. Stroud?
Sure. Kid's name is Jacoby Windman, number 4. Transfer from UNLV. and came in as a linebacker. He's had a really interesting career. Was sort of a late bloomer in high school, sort of a tight end, defensive end hybrid guy, played some quarterback and linebacker and also all over the place. Couldn't really find a home. Goes to UNLV, starts as a defensive end for his first year. Then not starting, but like begins his career as a defensive end.
Right.
Then moves to outside linebacker year 2. Then moves to middle linebacker year 3. Has a 100 tackle season, all Mountain West, and enters the transfer portal looking for something bigger. They bring him in here thinking he's going to be that stack linebacker type of player because they had lost a guy and they just were very, very thin there coming out of last year. And he looked like he was going to be a starter, practiced there all spring and everything, came in here, got the jump start. And then like midway through August camp, probably even later than that, maybe 2/3 through August, they realized they're like, oh, we're a little thin here, defensive end. He's got a background at it, right? And threw him down there. And according to Mel Tucker, he won his first 3 reps, in an inside run drill, just shedding blocks and getting to the ball carrier there. So right away, they're like, all right, he's the end now. And he's been their best guy, sort of long-winded there, but he's been their best guy. You probably saw some highlights or headlines in weeks 1 and 2. He had 5.5 sacks, I want to say it was, across those games, and 4 forced fumbles. I think it was. He had 3 in one game. So he was just dominant, against Western Michigan and Akron. And he's from New Orleans, which is where Michigan State's new assistant pass rush specialist, is his title, is Brandon Jordan is the guy's name. He works with Von Miller and TJ Watt and all the, Max Crosby, all these NFL guys.
I've heard of those guys.
Yeah, right. Yeah. A couple well-known dudes there.
Yeah.
And so he's on staff at Michigan State now. He's from New Orleans. Before he made it big and trained all these, all these big name guys, he was just a regular trainer in the New Orleans area, and he worked with Windman down there. And he always used to tell him, like, man, you're going to make your money as an edge rusher. And he was trying to play quarterback and do this, play receiver and do all these other things at the time. And now, 5-6 years later or whatever, they're reunited, and he's working with him and trying to, get him paid as a pass rusher. So you can see he's got a lot of that technique, but man, he's been a ghost since the Washington game, quite honestly. Their whole defensive line and pass rush really has fallen off a cliff. Those first 2 games, everybody's like, oh, wow. Brandon Jordan, the guy I just mentioned, he's really making an impact. And Jacoby Windman, oh, my gosh, could he be the Kenneth Walker of the defense? People actually said that. And, through 2 games, he looked really good. And then he hasn't been nearly as productive at all. But yet he's still their top threat right there, especially right now. Their other end, Jeff Petrowski, Ohio kid from St. Ed's, he's down. I don't know if he'll be back, but he's been out since the second half of the Washington game, and his backup, Chris Bogle, a transfer from Florida, went down in the Minnesota game. So I don't know if either of those guys will be back, but I just say that to say, like, they're pretty thin on the D-line right now.
Well, and I think that's going to be an interesting battle and I think it's interesting every week because, look, if you're going to stop Ohio State's offense, what's proven to be effective, at least the passing game, is, that shell coverage that you see a lot in the NFL, dropping guys deep. And if you can rush the passer without having to bring extra guys, get to C.J. Stroud, make him uncomfortable, I think that's a way to do it. Teams haven't been able to. Ohio State's pass blocking has been very good. They haven't played a great defensive line yet. But I think that's an interesting kind of aspect to this game. Let's talk about Peyton Thorne. You addressed him a little bit in the Q&A we did, but this was a guy I think many people thought the quarterback from Michigan State was going to take a step, really lead this offense. I believe he's a junior, right? So
yeah, redshirt junior.
Yeah, been in the program for a while. Why hasn't he taken that step in your mind? And I know you mentioned turnovers, something he didn't do before. What have you seen that maybe has been a regression in that department?
It's been weird. I mean, he came out this year, and like you said, and like I mentioned off the top, like when people try to look at this team and figure it out in the preseason, it's like you make a couple natural assumptions. Like the defensive backfield, they can't be that bad, right? Again, like they're all coming back. They'll at least be better than last year just by virtue of being a year older. You kind of thought like, all right, Peyton Thorne, he just started 13 games, he might not have been, in the lead role, but he has all that experience. Now he can step forward this year and become that lead dog. And he really hasn't. He came right out in the Western game and completed 50% of his passes, and it was just they were long, they were short, they were wide. He skipped a couple. I mean, he just really hasn't looked like himself. He hasn't put together a good game yet. He might have a good half, a good quarter, or 3 good series, and then a crazy one, where he turns the ball over and loses his mind, or a really awful start, and then he has a great last 5 minutes of the game or something and leads 2 quick touchdown drives. Like, he hasn't put a lot together. And, it makes you think right back to last year, though, and like how much Kenneth Walker did for that offense, even in the passing game. Just the play action, bombs that they were throwing to Jalen Naylor and Jaden Reed, all the flea flickers, like it became a joke around here, but I think they ran 6 flea flickers and scored on 4, maybe at least something like that. It was incredible. Like, you just don't do that. Like, that's video game stuff. So just the effect, bringing a safety down when Kenneth Walker came in the game, little subtle stuff like that might have freed a guy up, that might have made that throw or that read easier for him pre-snap. He just hasn't been accurate this year. And like you mentioned, he's just been sort of a little dangerous with the ball. And that's like what won him the job more than anything last year, was like his IQ and like his being risk averse. He wouldn't gamble. He wouldn't flail around with the ball and try to break tackles in the backfield. He would take the sack and eat it and live to play again. He wouldn't throw stuff into contested double coverage and stuff like that. And he's doing a little bit of more of that stuff this year. I think I don't know if it was Western or Akron, one of those first 2 games. He's scrambling left and just does the cardinal sin, throwing right back against your body, throwing right. And sure enough, it gets picked off like very easily by a linebacker. And it's just like, man, what's going on here? So it does feel like maybe he was pressing a little bit. Here's another thing. He's gotten like evaluated at least 3 out of the 5 games, maybe 4. Like, he's taken some big hits this year and has always come back from them, but has at least gotten checked out and looked at or helped off the field a couple of times. So I don't know by this point in the season that he's 100% there, physically. And look, you always hear who is at this point in the season. Usually you hear that like November, so maybe we're not there yet, but like still he's taken some hits. He's gone through a football season. So it's like, I don't know if he's all the way healthy right now. I don't know if he necessarily was even coming into this year all the way. But the fact is, he just hasn't taken that step. He's not able to elevate this team when, you went from an All-American in the backfield and being able to run on almost anybody to now they can't run on anybody. And so that makes it hard to play QB too, when you can't even, like I said, just simple inside-outside zone, whatever run plays your nearest middle school is running, Michigan State cannot run them to any consistent level at all and count on any production. So, that handcuffs the quarterback, that handcuffs the OC, and it plays into his mind, I think, too, when he's dropping back in terms of what can he trust, what he's seeing in front of him and this and that. But, so there's a lot of factors, I think, that go into it. He hasn't been good, but then there's other elements around him for sure that also haven't been good.
Well, and kind of going off that, another question from Where Goes One on YouTube. Deep threat for the Spartans. Who could possibly take the top off, maybe make a big play in this game?
I'd say 2. Jaden Reed, number 1. I think you guys are probably familiar with him. He's a veteran. He's been around. He's typically more of a catch and run type of guy. He's sort of like an NFL slot receivers type of build. About 6 foot 180-ish, but like very, very wiggly, very, very jittery in space there. But he plays way bigger than that. And him and Peyton Thorne. It's become, an eye-rolling thing over here. But like, they played together since middle school. They've known each other a long time. So they do have a very crisp, a very strong connection where, like I said, 6 foot 180 maybe for Jaden Reed. And he'll throw jump balls to him. Man, he'll go up there and get him. Usually those are sort of red zone type of plays, or 40 and in or something. You don't see a lot of like 60, 70-yard bombs for Jaden Reed, but he will go up and climb the ladder against bigger defenders and go get that ball. So he's one. The other one's Keon Coleman, number 0. He's the only guy, I think, who scored the only touchdown last year in Columbus. Yes. And he is just he's going to be a name you guys are going to notice around the Big Ten a lot more in the years to come, probably even by the end of the season, I think. He's a true sophomore, came in with just dripping like athletic potential, 6'3", about right now he's about 215, probably came in around like 190 or so, but came in with like a dozen legitimate basketball offers, was at one time committed to Kansas. And I heard from our people out there that like Bill Self was actually committed to Kansas to play wide receiver. But, his plan's always been to play both sports in college. And I heard that Bill Self was like legitimately happy to have him, during that time he was committed. And so, but he always was going to be a bigger deal football player. Signs here. And he did play basketball last year for Tom Izzo's team. Actually got into some games, played impressive. Like 8 games. Yeah. Just YouTube Keon Coleman, and like the kid's athleticism is off the charts for being this big. He had multiple triple doubles in high school. I want to say he had like 2 or 3 quadruple doubles. He's in there just fast break windmill dunking on kids and everything. It's just obscene. some of the stuff he was doing in high school. And then he'd go do triple jump and like set state records and like just a crazy athlete. He's playing wide receiver for him. And last year it was kind of like just relying on those gifts and just raw ability. And now he actually sort of understands the nuances. He's strong. He likes to block. He'll try to bury you, but he's also, a downfield threat. Obviously, he'll go up and get it. Very athletic guy, can still play basketball at a high level, and I think will be part of the team again this year. Maybe even have some type of, semi relevant role, because they only have 10 scholarship guys over here this season. So he's an up and comer to watch for sure. He's just sort of coming into his own. He's had a couple nice games, and Jaden Reed missed some time, and he took over as that number one target. But it's like everyone around here expects him to really break out sooner than later. Apparently, he's just a dominant force in practice, which maybe doesn't say much against Michigan State's defensive backfield, but apparently he just can't really be stopped in practice a lot of days.
Yeah, well, and to play both sports in college, especially at Big Ten level, I mean, there's been guys at Ohio State that have been talked about. Going back to I remember Terrell Pryor was talked about if he would play both football, basketball. Even recently, a guy like JT Tuimoloau, the defensive end, there's been conversation there. But every time it comes up in recruiting, it's like I'll believe it when I see it. So the fact that he was able to do that is pretty impressive. Because
it always seems like an empty promise, and even everybody I think was saying the same thing. It's like, oh yeah, we'll see. Then sure enough, you see him over there at Breslin Center, you see him practicing, you're like, wow, okay, this is real. He's not the only one. Malik Carr, their tight end number 6, also did it. Exact same thing. Like a week after the Peach Bowl, maybe it was 2 weeks they took off. I think it was a week they took off. A week they came and just observed basketball practice, and then like by mid-January, they were warming up and they were practicing. and doing everything, and then suited up. They both appeared in the Michigan game. I think it was like January 30th. And then Keon came in like 6 more times, one time notably in the first half against Iowa. He traveled with him, right? Malik Carr wouldn't travel. There was even a couple home games he didn't suit up, but he was still sort of with the team. Yeah. Keon would travel. He would show up. There was a time they played at Iowa, and I think that Michigan State had lost like 2 or 3 in a row, and Tom Izzo was just pissed off. He was boiling over. And just the effort wasn't there. So rare. Some effort related happened, and he was just like, screw it. Keon, get in here. Pointed on the and he'd never played beyond like the last minute of a game. Right. Until then. So he got in and played like 2.5 minutes or something in a road Big Ten game. Like that's not nothing for a guy who joined the program like a month and a half before that or whatever. Sure. So it almost makes you wish. I mean, I'm sure he could be a really good basketball player if he just played that. I don't think it's really detracting from football or anything. Like it's funny too. Like everybody asks him about it. Like it's this because it is though. It is a big deal. Like you said, like it's rare. It's really freaking hard. I can't even imagine, the time and everything that goes into it for him. And everybody always asks him all these questions about transition seasons or managing both, and he just doesn't. He acts like it's high school, So he's like, well, he's like one season ends, and then you go to the next season, then you play the other sport. And that's just what I do. That's what I've been doing for over a decade. He's like, what do you guys are talking? He doesn't understand like that. It's pretty phenomenal, what he's pulling off. And like I said, I wouldn't. He could be a starting level Big Ten player. I'm not gonna say be all conference necessarily. He could start in the Big Ten now, if he just focused on basketball for sure. And now he's, I think he's got all the gifts in the world to be a high level receiver.
Interesting, really interesting. Okay, I know you've got stuff you got to do tonight, high school football and whatnot. So let me get you out on this. Sue asked similar question to what I was going to close with. Are the Spidey fans hyped for this game? Now, I want to twist that a little bit because I also want to know, how is this kind of being, what did people are thinking in East Lansing in terms of this game? Obviously, you've got the 3rd-ranked Buckeyes, but this is a Michigan State team that has surprised this team before. I know it's been a while now at this point. So, like, in your perspective, what is kind of the overall view of this game among the Michigan State fan base?
Yeah, I'll just say, even when I talk about summer and making predictions and what people are trying to square about this team and how many games they could win, and most people fell, I think, between like 7 and 9 somewhere. Most people, and there were a couple very optimistic people, but nobody said 12. The most they went to 11, and it was always losing to Ohio State, always. Okay. So I don't think even all that, very simply, even people's highest, wildest projections didn't include them winning this game. So that was back then when everything was still rosy and the possibilities were endless. Now, it's just about, I think even the most optimistic people are like, well, we won't get embarrassed, when I show up and, sit my season tickets and everything. Like, I just went to lunch earlier with a buddy who has season tickets, and he couldn't find somebody to buy them. He wanted to sell them and couldn't find, so he's like, well, I guess I'll go watch this. I don't know what term he used, murder or something like that. It was some word like that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, there's no reason logically to believe, like we were talking about, I think it might've been another show I did, but been busy this week. But it's like, what's the path to the upset for Michigan State? It's like, I would be hoping, I'd be selling you a dream. It'd be hope and a prayer, and pixie dust for me to tell you anything realistic about how they could possibly come through and pull this. It would have to be some type of clown show, from Ohio State, and they're bobbling the ball and dropping it all around and putting it on the deck, and 2 or 3 first half turnout, just bizarro world type of stuff.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's kind of about, I think the feeling up here, to sort of get back to the point, is just like, can they keep it close? Will it be another boat racing, and just sort of the cumulative effect of that. Like I mentioned, I mean, they'll quickly, I think, because look, most people don't expect them to win this game. They'll quickly turn their attention to Wisconsin and say, okay, all the eggs in that basket.
Yeah.
Because that's a referendum on Mel Tucker, they'll say, that's a character test for this team and this and that. Everybody knows they're not as talented as Ohio State. Everybody knows they're beaten down mentally and physically. Like that's sort of an understanding at this point. They just don't want to leave with, blood stains on their clothes, I think. But there's more, I think, to be learned maybe next week. And I guess I'd say that's sort of how they're all feeling. It's just like, don't get embarrassed, if you can. But I think a lot of people still kind of are accepting of something that's not going to be very pleasant.
All right, Stephen. Well, thank you very much. I know you're busy this week with all you do. If you're looking for more Michigan State coverage, head over to Spartan Tailgate. You guys do a great job over there. I'll see you tomorrow in the press box. I'm going to come and steal your 2 tickets so I can eat more food because
excellent.
Yeah, they limit us. It's my least favorite thing about going to Michigan State. I love Michigan State otherwise.
But before I go, I wish the game was in Columbus every year because they treat us great down there in the press box, first of all. But also I love I stumbled across one time a couple years ago, Son of Thurman, the Thurman Cafe, like offshoot
Thurman Cafe,
in Delaware, I think it is. So I stopped there on the way out. It's like just a little small town, as folks probably didn't realize, and like you feel like you're off the radar before like you go into all the hustle and bustle of a huge game day and everything. Whether it's the night before or the morning of or whatever, I love going down there and oh my God, incredible burger there. So I'm down for it to be at the Horseshoe every year, and then you get to the stadium and they treat you so well. So but sorry, you got to come up here. I'll see if I can do some backroom deals, get a couple extra tickets for you for a hot dog that was cooked 3 hours ago.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you too again for coming on and everything this week. You've been great. I appreciate it.
This was fun. Thanks for your help too on the Q&A and everything, man. And safe travels up here. I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, absolutely. See you, Stephen. All right, that was Stephen Brooks from our Michigan State side at 247 Sports. As I said, they do great work over there. Some good insight into that program, both what will happen tomorrow and what will happen maybe down the road a little bit with Michigan State. We've got our other guests stopping by the happy hour. If you've been tuning in each week with this, you'll recognize Timmy Hall from the Buckeye Show. Timmy, you must really like either me or doing this. You just keep coming back. And I know you can't drink during this because you got to work. So I don't know what it is that keeps bringing you back, but I appreciate it.
You'll never know what's in here.
Good point.
It'll be our little secret.
For those holding up, for those listening, describe what you just held up for those on the podcast version.
Describe what I held up. Oh, yeah, it's my Sheets tumbler. That's all. I forgot this wasn't just on YouTube. Man, must be nice to be throwing this out to multiple platforms. It's not just video, not just YouTube. Boy, wild times that we're living in. But yeah, you know what? Why can't it be more like the Mad Men era, where in the 1950s, 1960s, drinking at work? And I feel like the higher up you are, and I guess it's kind of common sense, the higher up you are, the less people can tell you what to do. But you see, dudes with the decanters in the office. It's like no big thing to pour yourself a bourbon while you're working. So why can't I just crack a beer and not be looked on like I'm some kind of drunkard? I can have one responsibly and do my work. It might even be better. Who knows?
I will tell you this, 100% of the jobs that I've had as an adult, I have drank while working. And whether that has been allowed or not is a different story. But
who knows? Yeah,
I just drink responsibly. And, right now, my Cardinals are playing in the playoffs. I see Sue has commented on here a couple times about them, so I'm glad I'm not the only one cheering for the Cardinals here. But so I'm drinking a Bud Light, St. Louis's finest. And,
of course.
They're winning right now, so things are going good. All right, let's get to the Buckeyes because that's what people care about here. Tim, we have a couple comments I wanted to address before we got into the topic the topic I told you I thought was interesting for this one. The first one, Travion, Cam Brown, and this is from James Walker on Facebook. Any word on them for the game tomorrow? I hesitate to try and say anything about injuries because we just have had so many pop-ups on game. I mean, Travion Henderson, everyone expected him to play. The coaching staff expected him to play last week, and it was a warm-up thing. I have a feeling from what they've said this week, from things I've heard, that both guys play. Just going into a game against Michigan State where you expect to win comfortably, what do you think of maybe not specifically these guys, but in general with the injuries? Are you more on the side of, look, keep them out if there's any question, or do you want guys on the field to make sure they get the job done?
No, I mean, Pat, I do think when you just heard Steven, that's very interesting, catching the last 5 minutes of your conversation there about where things are with Michigan State football. That is not fun, man. That is not good when you're paying a coach what you're paying him and it's all guaranteed. I'm sure you guys hit on that too.
Yeah.
And you are staring down the barrel, if you're Mel Tucker, of being 0-3 against the best team in the conference. And there could be some version of that where that would be okay while you are taking the reins and trying to build Michigan State football back up to where Mark D'Antonio had it at its peak. But you cannot have 3 consecutive blowout losses and then just walk around there like everything is fine, because it's not. So, no, I don't think Ohio State for this game, because of how they have just manhandled Michigan State for the last 2 years. Right. They need to be running anybody out there. I doubt we're going to see Jackson Smith and Jigba, despite what they said about him this week. No freaking way, man. And Travion and Cam Brown, it's just, I think less is known about these guys because these are more recent injuries. Travion just seems to have a nick or a bump that pops up every other week now. And that's why it looks like he's going to be Wally pipped by Mayan Williams. And Mayan, if you look at the PFF grades, he's actually graded out a little bit better of a running back. Well, he's graded out as the best running back in the country. So therefore he would be the best running back on Ohio State if he's graded
is that how that works?
In America. He's been incredible, Pat. So, and it's not that, of course, Travion, you want to have him in the mix. When he's healthy, when he's rock solid, he's good to go. Let's play the guy. But if he's coming over something, Mayan can handle this thing again. Even Hayden has had some nice burst and shown some really good vision and an ability to move the sticks and run the ball well. The offensive line is performing so great. I don't think that gets talked about enough. The consistency, their health, that's been a big factor. And what CJ Stroud is going to be able to do this week as opposed to last week, I know even if Michigan State tried to replicate dropping 8 all day and trying to take away the pass, I still don't know if it would work because CJ's just not going to have 2 in a row of that kind of performance. He's too proud to be able to do that.
Yeah, well, and Michigan State has one of the worst pass defenses in the country, whereas Rutgers is on the up and up when it comes to defense, and Greg Schiano knows what he's doing when it comes to that. I thought Mel Tucker knew what he was doing defensively. That's what his career was based on, and that hasn't panned out. But we both think Ohio State's going to win big tomorrow. I assume you are on that. So I wanted to touch on stepping away from the game and kind of looking back to the preseason and what our expectations were for this team, for some individual players. I'm going to let you talk first because I know you don't have too much time here with us this week, but kind of obviously they're 5-0, right? They're the number 3 team in the country. So they've lived up to expectations that way. But is there an area, a player, a position group, whatever, that has surprised you? And then maybe one that hasn't played to the level you expected with this team so far?
Yeah, I think far and away the level that, to start with the bad first, that hasn't played, you probably agree it's the secondary. It is, there's been some individual guys step up. I've really loved Lathan Ransom and what he brings. Tanner McAllister, I think we all thought would be a nice addition and a calming presence back there, and he has. And he made a hell of a breakup there and got his interception. So he's been a good player. But I mean, come on, when Denzel Burke was looking like one of the few good football players on defense last year on a bad defense, those are naturally some of the guys that you would expect to be even better players when a better scheme is put into place, when guys have more confidence, when they know everybody else around them is going to elevate their play. That should be even better for you. So Denzel Burke's play has obviously been concerning, and I don't know what they're waiting for, Pat. I don't know how many more touchdowns you need to see, get thrown on this guy when he loses individual battles. This is Ohio State football, so a Jair Brown or a J.K. Johnson, even as long as Jordan Hancock is not ready, give one of these dudes an actual shot to go in there and show what they can do, like consistently. Give them one of those guys like a whole half, just say enough is enough. And Denzel, it's time to take a seat for a little bit and work some things out. So I wonder about that. Secondary could be better. The linebackers have really just been incredible to me. And I wanted to see that. I absolutely had an expectation that position group would get better, because I don't think you can have a great defense if your linebackers are bad. Yeah. I don't care. Absolutely. I don't care how great your pass rush is. I don't care if you've got a couple of stellar players in the secondary. If you are missing tackles all day in the middle of the field and you don't have guys that stuff the right gap or they're out of position, you will get burned time and time again in the run game and even in the short and intermediate passing game. So if you don't have if you don't have a couple of good linebackers, you will stink on defense. That's just plain and simple. And so Steele Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg have been awesome. I've been really, really pleased with that. So mainly to take up all the air there, Pat, I'm mainly focused on defense. Sure. 85% of my concerns and expectations coming in were, what was this defense going to be? Give a top-rated offense in the country a chance. Just give those guys a chance. Be good enough so you don't lose out on a shot to win a national championship because one side of the football wasn't carrying their weight. It's like the Denver Bronco offense and what they weren't doing for the Denver Bronco defense. Exactly like that.
Yeah, I have Russell Wilson on a fantasy team, so that was painful last night.
Me too. I just went to the wire and picked up Zach Wilson for insurance.
Yeah.
Dear God.
I may have to do something like that. One thing I want to say about Denzel Burke, because I agree with you for the most part, but I've said this a couple times this week. When you're watching the game on TV, you can only see what the TV broadcast shows you, right? And so you usually see, when they show a cornerback, it's usually either the wide receiver made a play or the cornerback made a play. Denzel Burke, I think, has been once for making a play, and he celebrated it like he won the Super Bowl. But there have been, and maybe not as much as there should be, but there have been times from watching way up in the press box where they don't even go that way because Denzel Burke has been in good coverage. And I think that's important to point out, because if we're going to rip the kid when he, doesn't make the play or doesn't look like he's putting forth the effort, doesn't turn his head, whatever, it's been inconsistent. And I do wonder too, if last year it was about the same and we just were like, that's a freshman. I'd have to go back and really look at things. And, so we gave him a little more leeway. But yeah, you expected that progression of a guy in his second year as a starter, second year as a player. And I think that it has not been the step that we expected, right? So that is disappointing for sure, because this is a guy we were talking about, like potential All-American, if he played up to what we thought he could be this year. So I agree with you on that. The one thing I would add is the offensive line was a question for me coming in, just because of the new guys in it and the fact that they couldn't run block in short yardage situations to save their lives last year. That has been a very pleasant surprise for me. And I think you've seen the benefit that, credit to Mayan Williams for what he did the last 2 weeks, really. But you don't do that without an offensive line that can, dominate up front. And yeah, it was Rutgers, but they've got some guys. I think that especially once they get in the red zone, I'd wish Ohio State would just lean on that a little bit more. Too many throws inside the 10-yard line when you've got an offensive line that's proven they can block. You've got running backs that can score. I know you want CJ Stroud to do well and whatnot, but run the ball inside the 10. Just do it. I yell at teams all the time about this, and Ohio State has the capability to do it against 95% of the teams they play. So that's been the biggest thing for me. You touched on the other two I was going to talk about. I think those have been pleasant. The linebackers specifically have been pleasant surprises, more than pleasant surprise, right? I mean, who thought this was going to be what Tommy Eichenberg did this year? Steel Chambers was, yeah. Like, I mean, Steel Chambers was good towards the end of the season, and you expected that progression that we just talked about with Denzel Burke. But Tommy Eichenberg, I mean, he started all last year, and it was a roller coaster. I mean, he had a good Rose Bowl statistically, but Utah still was able to do what they did. Now he's arguably in the conversation for the best linebacker in the country through 5 weeks. So,
and you know what's interesting about like what our perception was recently of the Ohio State linebacker, Baron Browning and Pete Werner, it was not that long ago when those two guys played here, and they are turning into studs. I mean, best linebackers in the world type of stuff. I mean, look at the season Pete Werner's having. Look at the game Baron Browning was turning in before he went out with that injury. I didn't see the update. I hope he's okay. It looked like a hand or wrist type of thing. But my goodness, like, what does that say about having a defense? What did that say about, losing some time with the pandemic, the shortened season, blaming Kevin Warren, Kerry Combs for not getting the most out of some football players on that defense that were clearly that talented all around. And now, we kind of ragged on Tough Borland a little bit for his lack of speed, but a good hard-nosed, Big Ten football player. And now with Tommy and Steele, it looks like you certainly got some athletes there, and you're getting back on track for what Ohio State linebackers are supposed to look like, Pat.
Yeah, and you don't need speed necessarily to be a middle linebacker. I mean, James Laurinaitis wasn't the fastest guy in the world. Tommy Eichenberg is not fast. I mean, he knows where to go. He gets there, but you don't have to be the fastest guy. All right, Tim, I know you got to go. You got work obligations or whatever it is that you're doing over there. So,
just some work stuff.
Yeah, no big deal. Thanks for jumping on again. I do appreciate it. So I'm not talking into the abyss. You always bring some great insight. So, hopefully we'll see you again. Well, next week we'll see what we do. I may try and come up with something fun next week, given that it's the bye week. But go do what you need to do. I appreciate you jumping on.
We'll see you later on the Buckeye show, right, Pat?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, my man. Take it easy.
See you, Tim. All right, thanks again for Tim for jumping on there. Steven also, if you missed that before, Steven from our 247 Sports Michigan State site, he was great providing us with some analysis on there. I'm going to take a few more questions I noticed. If you have more questions about the Buckeyes, feel free to throw them in the chat if you're watching live. We'll wrap this up after that. Timothy Thomas on YouTube, this is more of a statement than a question, but something I've seen a lot of people talking about. He said, hope we do well in the first half. McCord, Hayden, McCaffrey need to get lots of reps. OSU is pretty banged up this year. I agree. I mean, Ohio State's already gotten some of those guys a good amount of reps, but I was on a different show earlier this week, and we were talking about Kyle McCord and, the fact that he's been in some games this year, but he hasn't thrown much in the way of any sort of real passes. Now, I think there is something to the fact that mostly the backup quarterback doesn't get to go in and do very much unless there's an injury or unless you're blowing a team out where you can take the starters out at halftime and then maybe you throw it. We know Ryan Day is not going to just throw on a team that Ohio State is beating tremendously. He's just not that type of coach. Most coaches aren't going to do that. I think the fact that Kyle McCord is getting in games is important. Throwing some passes would be great, but let's remember, he did start a game last year. Sorry, I hit the camera there. He did start a game last year. He played an entire half, so it's not like he has no experience throwing the ball. And C.J. Stroud came in without throwing a pass and turned out to be pretty good. So I'm not too worried about that, but I always think it's great when you can get the backups reps. I think that's important for the future of any program. And at a place like Ohio State, you're supposed to win by enough that you are getting reps for the backups. Shane from YouTube here said, it's funny, the Golden Domers, that being Notre Dame, reached out to Brian Hartline for the OC job, and he basically said, hell no. I saw this getting thrown around on the internet this week. I cannot confirm that Notre Dame reached out to Brian Hartline. I don't know that, and I'm not going to pretend like I do. What I do know is that Brian Hartline is very happy being back in Columbus and coaching at Ohio State. And maybe there comes a time where there's an opportunity for him to go elsewhere and take a job that he's interested in. Maybe it ends up being with a guy like Marcus Freeman. I don't know what the relationship is between Brian Hartline and Marcus Freeman, but that time is not now. And I know that Brian Hartline is enjoying the role that he has at Ohio State. They have compensated him well. They've promoted him. He's gotten extra titles and all that so that he, can get paid. They can justify paying him more. And let's be honest, Brian Hartline spent several years in the NFL. So the guy isn't in need of a job that's going to pay him a ton of money just to get by. It would take something, I think, pretty unique, something that hits home with Brian Hartline for him to leave Ohio State in the near future. You never know what's going to happen. There could be changes that affect what Brian Hartline wants to do. Who knows? But I never want to project out far. But right now, I know for a fact Brian Hartline is very happy. Look at what he's doing with these receivers. Look at what's coming down the pipeline with the recruiting, and there's just no reason for him to go anywhere right now because he's essentially home. He's at Ohio State where he played, and he's coaching the position group that he played, and he's doing it very well. And he's, like I said, he's getting compensated well for that. So, I think there will be other people that come at Brian Hartline, other programs that are interested in him. You're going to hear this rumor. It's the same that you hear about any of the coaches at Ohio State that are successful. I mean, just think back to right after the Rose Bowl, and there was talk about NFL teams interested in Ryan Day. It's going to happen. Ryan Day has been really good at Ohio State. He's a young, exciting head coach who has NFL experience. So, but again, Ryan Day's not going anywhere anytime soon. So I think when you hear those things, take them with a grain of salt. I'm not sure where the Brian Hartline Notre Dame stuff originated from, but I don't think that you have to be too concerned about that anytime soon. So I just wanted to address that. I saw that pop up in there. Final thoughts on the Buckeyes here as they head to East Lansing. Look, I think this is going to be a pretty easy game, similar to what we've seen so far. You can read our predictions on the Bucknuts Roundtable, which went out a little while before we started recording this Friday afternoon. If this is anything other than a comfortable Ohio State win, I will be surprised. And as I wrote in the Roundtable, look, surprising upsets are surprising for a reason, right? No one sees them coming. No one thought Ohio State was going to go to Iowa the week after that big comeback against Penn State and play the way they did and lose that game. That's why they're surprising upsets. But this Michigan State team is in a world of hurt. As you heard, if you listened to Steven earlier in the show, it's not a good spot this year. Maybe in the future they get back on track. They're trending that way, but that time is not now. It would take something rather ridiculous, I think, for Ohio State to struggle in this game. I expect Ryan Day going on the road for the first time to want the team to get out to a fast start. It wouldn't surprise me if they win the coin toss again, if he takes the ball and wants to just go straight down the field. Let's get down the field. Let's get in the end zone. Let's set the tone early. But, of course, he trusts this defense, and Michigan State hasn't done a ton to prove that they should scare you that way. So I think it should be relatively easy. I forget off the top of my head what I had as the score prediction. I think it was like 55-13 or something. This should be a rinse, wash, and repeat, as Steve Hellwagons likes to say, of what we've seen the last few weeks. So I'm going to wrap it up here. This has been another fun one. I enjoyed doing these. I hope you guys enjoy listening, watching, however you're doing it. Please like, subscribe, all that good stuff, whatever platform you're on, whether you're watching this live or whether you listen to it after the fact as a podcast. That really helps us out. We appreciate it. As always, go over to Bucknuts for all of our coverage of Ohio State. If you're into the recruiting and you like some of the more detailed stuff, please become a Bucknuts and 247 Sports VIP member. We have great stuff around the network. And if you're a college football, college basketball nut, it's a great place to be. And I don't just say that because I work there. I say that because I truly mean it. Anyway, thank you guys all for tuning in, whether you watch it live, whether you listen after the fact. This has been another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I look forward to talking to you guys next week. I'm not sure when we're going to do next week. It's the bye week, obviously. I'm traveling next weekend, so we may do something earlier in the week. We'll see. I'm going to play around with some ideas, see if I can get some guests on that might be interesting. But yeah, stay tuned to social media and on the Bucknuts message boards. I'll keep you guys aware of what our plan is. But anyway, another week. We'll see what the Buckeyes do tomorrow, but I don't think it'll be anything to worry about on your Saturday afternoon. Cheers.